The flashlight shook in Elena's hand as she pushed the basement door open. The air hit her first, cold, stale, like something sealed away for years. She stepped down, one slow step at a time, the wooden stairs groaning beneath her feet. Outside, the storm hammered the mansion walls. Lightning cracked through the narrow slit of a basement window, and for one frozen second, the entire room lit up white. That was when she saw it. Hanging from an iron hook bolted to the ceiling, a wedding dress. White satin, cathedral train, intricate lace along the bodice. Beautiful even now. Except the chest was soaked in blood. Dark, dry, brown at the edges. A massive stain that had spread from the heart outward, like something had bloomed and died in the fabric. Elena's breath left her body. She stepped closer without meaning to. Her flashlight found the torn veil crumpled on the floor beneath it. Found the small wooden box sitting on the shelf beside it, lid open. Inside, 2 wedding rings. One delicate, one thick. Side by side. Never worn again. The dress swayed slightly, even though there was no wine down here. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Above her. Slow, deliberate, moving toward the basement door. And a voice, low, controlled, the voice she had fallen asleep to every night for 3 months. Elena. A pause. You weren't supposed to see this. She killed her flashlight. Pressed herself against the cold stone wall. Heart slamming so hard she was certain he could hear it through the ceiling. 3 months earlier, Elena Marsh had believed that marrying Adrian Blackwood was the greatest miracle of her ordinary life. She had been running late to a charity gala she had no business attending. Borrowed dress, borrowed heels, a press pass from her editor that she had nearly lost on the subway. She was nobody, a mid-level journalist at a struggling digital magazine, drowning in her late mother's medical debt, eating microwave dinners at her desk 4 nights a week. The gala had been an assignment. Cover the event, photograph the donors, file 800 words by midnight. She had not expected to trip on the marble steps outside the venue. She had not expected the hand that caught her. Strong, firm, reflexively quick. The hand of someone accustomed to controlling things before they fell apart. Careful. His voice was low, unhurried. She looked up into the face of Adrian Blackwood and forgot every word she had ever learned. He was not handsome the way magazine covers were handsome. He was striking in the way a storm was striking, something you watched from a distance because getting close felt genuinely dangerous. Dark eyes that gave nothing away, a jaw cut like architecture. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than her annual salary, and he was looking at her like she was the only interesting thing in the room. "Thank you," she managed. I'm fine." "You were falling," he said. "You're not fine yet." He did not let go of her arm until she was fully upright. And even then, something in his gaze stayed on her a moment longer than it should have. She told herself she imagined that part. She did not imagine it. By the end of that evening, he had found her twice more in the crowd. Not aggressively, just present. Appearing beside her at the champagne table. Materializing near the exit when her press pass got questioned by security. Each time he said very little. Watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Left before she could ask his name. She found out who he was the next morning when her editor nearly choked on his coffee reading her gala photos. Adrian Blackwood, 38 years old. CEO of Blackwood Capital Group with interests spanning real estate, private equity, defense contracting, and 3 other industries Elena had to look up. Net worth estimated, and the article stressed estimated, at $4 billion. Known for being ruthless in business and completely invisible in his personal life. No social media. No public relationships on record. A man who moved through the world leaving no fingerprints. He called her office the next day. She assumed it was a wrong number. It was not. He asked if she would have dinner with him. She said she needed to think about it, which was a lie. She said yes before she finished the sentence. He chose a restaurant so exclusive it did not have a sign on the door. He arrived exactly on time. He pulled out her chair without making it feel performative. He asked her questions, real ones, not the polite social tennis of wealthy men who wanted an audience. He asked about her mother, about what it felt like to write stories that no one read, about whether she believed people could genuinely change. She asked him almost nothing because every time she tried, he redirected with the elegant ease of someone who had practiced not being known. But the way he looked at her across that candlelit table made her feel, for the first time in years, like being known might be survivable. The courtship, if a word that soft could describe what Adrian Blackwood did, lasted 6 weeks. 6 weeks of extraordinary things. A private flight to Florence to see an exhibition he thought she would like. He was right. Weekends at his vineyard estate outside the city. Flowers that arrived at her apartment without cards because he said she would know they were from him. She did. A slow dismantling of every wall she had ever built, executed not with force but with patience and the unsettling certainty of a man who had already decided how things would go. He told her once, walking along the water at dusk, "You're safe with me now, Elena." She had leaned into his side and believed him completely. The proposal was quiet. No audience. No spectacle. Just the two of them on the terrace of his estate, the city lights below, a ring that fit perfectly because somehow he had already known her size. "Marry me," he said. Not a question quite. She said yes. The wedding was small by billionaire standards, 200 guests, a private chapel, a dress designed exclusively for her. It was the most beautiful day of her life. She cried when she saw him waiting at the altar. He did not cry, but his jaw tightened in that particular way she had come to recognize as Adrian Blackwood, overwhelmed and refusing to show it. She had moved into the mansion 1 week after the ceremony. That was when things began to shift. It was nothing dramatic at first. Nothing she could have pointed to and named. More like a change in weather, a subtle pressure drop, a sky that looked wrong before you could explain why. The mansion staff were unfailingly polite, impeccably trained, and they watched her. Not rudely, not with hostility, with something more unsettling, a careful, anticipatory attention, like people waiting to see what a new animal would do in an unfamiliar enclosure. Whenever she entered a room, conversation stopped at a speed that was slightly too fast for coincidence. When she asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Harlow, a severe, precise woman in her 60s, for a tour of the West Wing, the woman smiled without warmth and said that wing was undergoing renovation. It had been under renovation, Elena later discovered, for the past 4 years. She began noticing other things. There were no photographs of Adrian's past anywhere in the house. No childhood pictures. No old friends. No evidence of any previous life before the version of himself he had chosen to present. She searched the walls, the shelves, the desk in his office that she was permitted to enter. Nothing. It was as though he had been assembled, fully formed, from some private blueprint, and all earlier drafts had been destroyed. She asked him about it one night. Casually, she thought. "You don't have any old photos around," she said. "Not even family." He did not look up from his reading. "I don't believe in preserving what's already gone." "What about people? Past relationships?" The page turned. Slowly. "Don't ask me about women who betrayed me," he said. His voice was perfectly even, as though he had answered this question once before and found it tedious. "It won't go anywhere useful for either of us." She let it drop, but the sentence stayed with her. Women. Plural. It was Mrs. Harlow who gave her the first real crack to peer through, without meaning to. Elena had been coming down the east hallway, socks quiet on the hardwood, when she heard 2 of the kitchen staff talking around the corner. She stopped. "She looks just like the last one." A woman's voice. Low, uncomfortable. "Keep your mouth shut about that." A man's voice. Frightened. "I'm just saying. Same hair." "Same." "I said enough." Footsteps. Elena pressed back against the wall and made herself invisible. Her heart had begun a new rhythm. Faster, shallower, wrong. Same as the last one. She did not sleep well that night. Or the next. She began searching online with the focused desperation of someone who had realized, too late, that they had walked into a story they did not understand. She searched Adrian's name in combination with every variation she could think of. Ex-girlfriend. Lawsuit. Scandal. Wife. Most results were business coverage. Acquisitions. Market analysis. Profiles that said very little and implied slightly more. But buried on the 3rd page of one search, she found a brief article from a regional paper. 4 years old. A woman named Celeste Morgan had gone missing following the end of a relationship with a prominent private equity figure. The article mentioned his name once, in a paragraph that was carefully worded to imply nothing directly. Celeste's family had spoken to investigators. No charges were ever filed. The story had died without resolution. Elena read it 4 times. She found a second article 2 days later. Different woman. Different year. Similar shape, a relationship, an abrupt ending, a disappearance that never quite got explained. The name Adrian Blackwood appeared in neither article directly, but the proximity was there, visible to anyone willing to look. She told herself there were explanations. She told herself correlation was not causation. She was a journalist. She knew how narratives could be constructed from fragments that meant nothing alone. She also knew that the West Wing had been locked for 4 years, and that the staff went quiet when she walked into rooms, and that her husband had told her with total calm not to ask about women who betrayed him. She started sleeping lightly, started paying attention to sounds she had previously filtered out, the old mansion settling, pipes moving, the ambient noise of a large building at night. Most of it meant nothing, but on the third night of listening, she heard something she could not explain. Through the far wall of the east corridor, faint, intermittent, something that sounded almost like crying. Low, rhythmic. Not the house, not the pipes. She stood at that wall for a long time, hand flat against the plaster, feeling nothing. But she had heard it. She was certain she had heard it. The next morning she found, tucked inside an old architectural portfolio in Adrian's library, a set of original blueprints for the mansion. She told herself she was not snooping. She told herself she had every right to understand the house she lived in. She unrolled the blueprints on the library table and studied them in the afternoon light. The basement shown on the blueprints was twice the size of what she had seen. There was a second section, deeper, a corridor that branched off the main room and extended under the east wing. It was marked on the original plans with a label that had been partially obscured by age and water damage. She could still read 2 of the words, containment, and below that, private. She stood there for a very long time looking at the paper. That was the night of the storm. The power went out at 11:17. She knew the time because she had been lying awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain assault the roof. Adrian was traveling Geneva, he had said, back in 2 days. The house was hers and the staff's. When the lights died, she lay still for 30 seconds. Then she got up, found the flashlight in the nightstand drawer, and went downstairs. She told herself she just wanted to check the fuse box. She found the basement door behind the utility room. She had been in the main basement once before. Adrian had shown her himself casually, early in their time at the mansion. Wine cellar, storage, old furniture under dust sheets. Nothing unusual. But the blueprints had shown something beyond the wine cellar. A doorway that had not been visible during that tour. She found it behind a tall steel shelving unit. The shelf moved on concealed casters, smoothly, deliberately engineered to be moved. The door behind it was wooden, old, fitted with a new lock that had been installed recently enough that the wood around it was still pale. The lock was not engaged. She pushed the door open and went through. The dress was the first thing her flashlight found. She stared at it for what felt like a long time but was probably 15 seconds. The blood was old, dried to rust brown at the center, dark at the spread edges. The dress was her size. It was the same designer as her own wedding gown. She recognized the particular construction of the bodice, the signature lace at the hem. Someone had commissioned it from the same atelier. Someone who had walked down an aisle in it and bled through the chest. The torn veil on the floor. The 2 rings in the open box. Her flashlight moved slowly around the room, cataloging details the way her journalist's brain never stopped doing even when she was terrified. Stone walls. Iron hooks in the ceiling. A second door at the far end of the room, heavy, reinforced. Old stains on the floor in a pattern she did not let herself interpret. Then the footsteps above her. Then his voice. Elena ran. She made it out of the hidden corridor, back through the main basement, up the stairs and into the utility room in less than 40 seconds. She pressed herself into the shadows beside the water heater and stopped breathing. She heard the basement door open. Footsteps on the stairs. Slow. Deliberate. Then, after a long silence, the footsteps retreated. She stood in the dark for 20 minutes before she moved again. Adrian was not supposed to be home until Thursday. It was Tuesday night. She did not know what that meant. She did not know what any of it meant. She only knew that she had seen a blood-soaked wedding dress in her husband's hidden basement, and that somewhere in this house, something was wrong in a way that no explanation she could construct from the available evidence made acceptable. She went back upstairs. She did not sleep. The next morning, he was at the breakfast table as though he had always been there. Calm. Impeccable. Reading something on his phone with the focused quiet she used to find reassuring. "You came home early," she said. "Meeting was resolved." He looked up. "You slept badly." "Storm kept me up." He studied her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite suspicion, not quite concern. Something precise and unreadable. "Elena." He set his phone down. "Is there something you want to ask me?" She looked at him across the breakfast table. At the man she had married. At the hands that had caught her on those marble steps. That had held her through 3 months of extraordinary tenderness. That had put a ring on her finger in the quiet dark of a terrace evening. "No," she said. She spent the day planning. She was not running. Not yet. She needed to understand what she had seen before she did anything. The journalist in her. The part that had survived debt and grief and disappointment by turning chaos into narrative, insisted on understanding before acting. She had found a dress. She had found rings. She had not found a body. She had not found proof of anything except that her husband kept secrets in locked rooms, which was not, by itself, a crime. But there was a second door in that corridor. Heavy. Reinforced. She went back that night. Adrian was in his study. She could see the light under the door. She moved through the house in darkness, back to the utility room, back to the hidden shelf, back through the old wooden door. The flashlight found the blood-stained dress. She moved past it. The second door at the end of the corridor had a bolt on the outside. Not a lock, a bolt. The kind you slid open from the hallway side. She stood in front of it for a long time. Then she opened it. The smell hit her first. Enclosed air, unwashed fabric, something human and stale. The corridor beyond was narrow, stone-walled, and it opened into a row of 3 rooms, each with its own reinforced door. Each door fitted with a slot at the base and a bolt at the top. 2 of the bolts were engaged. She opened the first door. The woman inside was sitting on a cot along the far wall. She was thin, too thin, with dark hair that had grown long and tangled. She was not chained, not physically restrained. She was just sitting there in the half-dark, and when Elena's flashlight found her face, she did not flinch or cry or reach out. She just looked at Elena with the particular exhausted clarity of someone who had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Run," the woman said. Her voice was rough from disuse. "Get out. Now, before he finds you here." "How long have you been down here?" Elena whispered. 14 months. Elena's hand tightened on the flashlight. "Are there others?" "The next room." She moved to the second door. Inside, another woman, younger, sitting cross-legged on the floor against the wall, eyes open. When the light reached her, she scrambled backward. "Who are you?" she hissed. "His wife," Elena said. "I'm going to get you out." "You can't." The woman was shaking her head. Emphatic. Almost frightened by the offer itself. "You don't understand what we are. You don't understand what we did. I don't care what you did. You're coming with me." "No." The first woman had appeared in the corridor behind Elena. She had come out of her own room voluntarily. She was standing in the narrow space, arms wrapped around herself, expression complicated. "He's right that we can't leave. Not freely. Not yet." "What does that mean?" "It means," the second woman said from the floor, voice dropping to something raw and urgent, "that 2 of us tried to kill him. That one of us was sent here specifically to destroy him. That the woman in that dress," she gestured vaguely upward, toward the room Elena had come from, "stabbed him at the altar with a blade she had taped to her thigh. She worked for people who wanted him dead." Elena was silent. "He didn't kill her," the first woman said quietly. "He could have. She was bleeding on the floor and he had every reason and he didn't. He called a doctor. He put her here instead. He put you all here instead." "Yes. That doesn't make it right." "No." The first woman's voice was utterly flat. "It doesn't. But it's not what you came down here thinking it was." Elena heard the sound before she processed it. Footsteps above them, quick, moving with purpose toward the utility room. She had left the shelf door open. She spun around. Adrian was in the corridor entrance behind her. He looked at the 2 women. He looked at Elena. Something passed across his face. Fast, controlled, extinguished before it could be read. "Come upstairs," he said. "Tell me right now," Elena said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "Tell me what this is." He looked at her for a long moment. The women behind her were silent. "Come upstairs," he said again. "And I will." He told her in the library. Standing, not sitting, neither of them could sit. The fire had been lit and it threw orange light across his face as he talked. And Elena stood across the room with her arms folded and listened to the thing she had married finally speak true. He had made enemies. This was not a surprise to anyone who knew what he was. The kind of enemies that did not send lawyers, that sent people. Carefully constructed people, beautifully packaged, designed to get close enough to do real damage. His first fiancée, 6 years ago, had been approached by a rival consortium 18 months into their relationship. She had agreed to gather financial intelligence and pass it to them. When he discovered it, he confronted her at the altar rather than before, because he needed to be certain. She had responded by drawing a blade from beneath her dress and driving it into the left side of his chest, 2 centimeters from his heart. He survived. The rival consortium did not get what they wanted. He did not call the police. If he had called the police, the people behind her would have known the full extent of what he had and what she had almost taken. So he kept her. And he kept the others who came after her, 2 more over 4 years, each one sent for a different purpose, each one caught before they could finish the job, each one imprisoned rather than eliminated, because Adrian Blackwood was, in his particular dark and complicated way, a man with a line he would not cross. "You could have told me," Elena said. Her voice cracked on the last word. "No," he said. "I couldn't." "Why?" "Because you were a journalist. Because I needed to know who you were before I told you who I was. Because every time I have trusted someone with this, they have tried to use it." He paused. "And because I wanted to be wrong about needing to distrust you. I wanted that very much." She stared at him. "The women in the basement," she said. "What happens to them?" "They stay until the people who sent them no longer have the power to benefit from what they know. Months. Sometimes more." His jaw was tight. "They are fed. They have medical care. They are not harmed. They're imprisoned." Yes. She had no language for what she was feeling. It was not a single thing. Not rage alone, not relief alone, not grief or love or fear, but all of it compacted into something that had no name in any vocabulary she had been given. She went to bed alone that night. She lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and tried to build a version of the world that made sense. She did not reach one. What reached her instead, at 2 in the morning, was the sound of breaking glass from the east wing. Then voices, not the mansion staff, not Adrian, voices she did not recognize, shouting in a language she could not identify. Then Adrian's voice, hard and commanding, in the corridor outside her room. She opened the door. He was already moving past her. "Stay inside. Lock it." She did not lock it. She followed him to the top of the east staircase and looked down into chaos. 3 men had come through the east wing ground floor windows. They were moving fast and organized, and as Elena watched from above, she saw one of them hold up a phone and speak into it, and heard from somewhere below, from somewhere familiar and enclosed and impossible, a response. From the basement, the locked rooms. Someone down there had a phone she had not known about. Someone down there had been communicating with the people now moving through the house. And as the first man reached the base of the stairs and looked up and saw Elena standing there, she understood, with the terrible completeness of a story whose ending she should have seen coming, that the women below had been waiting. Not for rescue. For this. Adrian met the first man before he reached the 4th step. She would not describe what followed in detail, even later, even to herself. She would say only that Adrian Blackwood moved through violence with the same contained, unhurried certainty with which he moved through everything else, and that when it was over, and when the men had been restrained and the police, finally, belatedly, necessarily, had been called, she found him in the front hall with blood on his knuckles and his breathing barely elevated. He looked at her. She crossed the room and put her hand against the left side of his chest, where she knew there was a scar she had touched 100 times without asking about. His heart beat steadily against her palm. She stood there for a long time. She did not leave. The investigation that followed lasted 6 weeks. It was complex and layered and involved authorities in 3 countries and a network of financial crimes that Elena could not fully map even with all her training. Adrian's legal team was extraordinary. The imprisoned women became, formally, material witnesses. 2 of them cooperated fully. 1 did not. Elena wrote nothing. Published nothing. For the first time in her career, she sat on a story that would have made her name, and she sat on it deliberately, with full understanding of what she was choosing. The night after the last investigator left the mansion, she moved her things into Adrian's room. He watched her carry the last armful of clothes through his door without speaking. Then he said, "You don't have to." "I know," she said. She put her things in the closet that had already been cleared to receive them. She did not ask when he had cleared it. She did not need to know. 3 days later, Mrs. Harlow came to find her in the east sitting room. Elena had begun learning the house in earnest, its moods, its geography, the particular hierarchy of its rhythms. She was good at learning systems. It was what she had always done. "Ma'am, Mrs. Harlow said with an expression that was almost not quite respect. "The matter in the lower corridor. Mr. Blackwood has left the disposition to your judgment." Elena looked up from the book she was not really reading. "The remaining witness," Mrs. Harlow clarified. "She's still uncooperative with the authorities. Mr. Blackwood says it's your house as much as his." Elena was quiet for a moment. She thought about a blood-soaked dress hanging from an iron hook. She thought about a man with a scar 2 centimeters from his heart. She thought about what it meant to build a life inside a story that had not been written for someone like her, and to write yourself into it anyway. She set down her book. "Lock her deeper underground," Elena said. Mrs. Harlow nodded once, precisely, and left without another word. Elena picked up her book. Outside the window, the city carried on. Ordinary and vast, and entirely unaware of what happened in the rooms beneath this house, of the choices made in the dark, of the woman sitting in the East Wing who had walked into a billionaire's life as nobody and had become, quietly, deliberately, irrevocably, someone else entirely. If you've made it this far, and the fact that you have tells me everything, drop a comment below and tell me, would you have stayed or would you have run? Because I genuinely cannot decide which answer is more honest. Subscribe if this story kept you up. Like it so someone else loses sleep tonight too.